One thing that comes out very strongly from the sinking of the Titanic in April 1912 is how much it shows us about the prevalence of class distinction in that age. Now, the fate of the supposedly unsinkable Titanic has come to symbolise the pride, hubris, and the end of the optimism of the superficially idyllic Edwardian age. The White Star liner Titanic, on its maiden voyage, embodied the height of luxury for the first-class passengers. Many of them were society figures and billionaires. They enjoyed grand staircases, sumptuous dining rooms, elegant lounges, writing and smoking rooms, and they each had very elegant staterooms. After the sinking of the ship, there was actually a suggestion that the provision of such luxuries as Turkish baths, gymnasiums, and other so-called luxuries involved a sacrifice of some of the more essential things, like lifeboats. However, there was actually enough space for more lifeboats on the Titanic. The splendour of it all for first-class travellers was not at the expense of safety. There were, though, despite the space for lifeboats, not enough. There were also very impressive medical facilities. The medical team on board was led by a 62-year-old senior surgeon, William McLaughlin, who'd practiced medicine at sea for over 40 years. He was assisted by a younger man, 37-year-old John Simpson. He was a territorial captain with the Royal Army Medical Corps. He had originally gone to sea for the sake of his own health, and his responsibility was for the health of the second and third class passengers and of the crew. But hospital facilities, like everything else on board, were strictly segregated. First and second class passengers had their own hospital rooms for infectious cases. These were on D-deck near the galley. There was also a very small sick bay for the crew. And the third class had their own hospital wards. The luxury in them all depended on the status of the passenger. Well, these hospital facilities were very little used during the maiden voyage of the Titanic. It was only too short. Indeed, the only recorded casualty was when a first-class passenger fell on the grand staircase and had her arm broken. Well, it was very much a case of many of the wealthy passengers taking their own medicines with them. Charlotte Drake Codiza had her own well-equipped medical chest, which she took on board with her luggage of 14 trunks, 4 suitcases, and 3 crates. First-class passengers could also avail themselves of a well-equipped gymnasium, though when exercising in it, they would keep themselves fit, formally dressed in suit, collar and tie, or skirt, coat and bonnet. There were standards to be kept up. Thomas Macaulay, the 36-year-old gymnasium instructor, would, however, run here and there, looking the very picture of robust, rosy-cheeked health and fitness in his white flannels, as he supervised the exercise of the passengers. He remained at his post as the ship went down and gave guidance on the use of the mechanical horses and parallel bars to those in the gymnasium who were seeking distraction from their fate. Well, the luggage recovered many years later from the Titanic does tell us very much about the people that these items belong to. For example, 27-year-old Franz Polbaum, who had emigrated from Bremen in 1907 to New York and was now returning home to New York from a visit to Germany and to stay in Paris as a second-class passenger, went down with the ship on the 15th of April. His body was never recovered, but his cabin trunk was recovered in 1993. Among his possessions was a new striped grey tie bought in New York, blue garters and newly purchased silk socks, still attached to each other at the toe. They were all unworn. He never had the chance to wear them. And yet, we should contrast the newness of some of Polbaum's clothes with equal poignancy of the more worn clothing in the humbler suitcase of another emigrant, William Henry Allen, a 35-year-old Birmingham toolmaker travelling in third class. His case, neatly packed for new life, contained his best black woolen three-piece suit, shirt collars, smart shoes and worn work shoes, socks and darning wool, a pocket watch and a sterling silver matchbox, still containing matches. So everything was very much worn. Even Fitz Polbaum had carefully packed in his cabin baggage his working tools, including a tape measure, showing the importance to him of his craftsmanship and skills as a machinist or engineer. So it's very much a case of everyone in their own very limited sphere with very different possessions. Compare the relatively humble possessions and clothing of Polbaum and Allen with the elaborate dress of many other passengers, some of whom even went down wearing their dinner jackets. Even after the sinking of the Titanic following its collision with an iceberg on the 12th of April 1912, class distinctions continue to govern the medical treatment of the survivors and the disposal of the bodies of the victims. When survivors were brought aboard the Carpathian, the first ship to reach the site of the sinking, they were divided up according to their status aboard their Titanic, and then sent to the relevant first, second or third class dining saloon for first aid treatment. After treatment for hypothermia, shock, exposure to the elements, and minor injuries, the first and second class passengers were accommodated in the public saloons and officers' cabins. Third class passengers were simply moved into steerage. However, once the ship reached New York, the usual customs formalities were suspended for all passengers, and even immigrants amongst them were allowed to land unchecked and were spared the medical inspections of Ellis Island. Other ships were sent to recover the corpses of the victims. First class passengers who could be identified from their effects or simply because they were very well dressed would be placed into coffins on the poop deck. Second and third class passengers were merely sewn up in canvas sacks. Many of the crew, whether identifiable or not from their effects, and also some of the obviously less affluent passengers were immediately buried at sea. The bodies of those crew who were taken ashore for burial, however, were stored in the ice-filled holds of the ships. They were not embalmed, they were not even sewn up in canvas. And when they were brought ashore at Halifax, Canada, it was found that many of the frozen limbs had to be broken to get the bodies onto stretchers and into their coffins. Now, in all of the confusion, there were mistakes of classification made, and the social order could be subverted. There were examples of some members of the crew who were brought back for burial on land because they were wearing Savile Row tailoring. Because of their expensive suits, they were placed into the coffins reserved exclusively for first class passengers. What had happened was that several of the crew, seeking warmer clothing that might help them survive in the icy waters of the Atlantic, seemed to have helped themselves to the bespoke suits and heavy overcoats from the abandoned first-class staterooms. As they were well turned out in death and of smart appearance, they'd been afforded the respect usually given only to first-class passengers, only for their true identities to emerge when their personal effects were properly examined before their corpses were prepared for embalming and burial, and while they were being identified. Class distinctions were important even in death. The man in black tie, in the dinner jacket, the tuxedo, the man and women in the smart Savile Row suits and the bespoke dresses and coats were all given more respect than the more roughly dressed passengers who were their lower orders. It is a world which we hope has long since gone.